Some people get upset because I use the phrase Negro. Others get upset because I it looks like I'm so-called degrading black people. Well, I'm just talking about what is presented before me. If you look at the sad state of affairs of this Afro-American community of Negroes, pretty much this is what we have going on right now. And I am just expressing my disappointment and just sadness about this Afro American Negro and his sad state of affairs. Here we have, in the era of the first black president, we have a black community that is pretty much in the sewer right now. If we look at the black community as it was in the 1980s, where people were looking like they were getting ready to progress and move forward, and then you compare it to today, things are actually worse than they were 25 years ago. Here we have a group, not a group of interdependent black people who are ready to start to hire their own and take care of their own. We have a group of dependent class Negroes who are sitting here on the second and third generation waiting for somebody to take care of them. I dare to say that black people today are more worse off than the slaves were when they were emancipated back in 1865. Because at least the slaves back in 1865 had the mentality to say to themselves that we have to build our own, we have to take care of our own, and we have to work together. And they were trying their best to live to become American citizens. And if they had the same tools and resources that many of today's Afro Americans had today, they would have a thriving black community. Whereas today's Negroes, with $40 trillion poured in their community over the last 40 years, built multiple programs such as job training, job readiness, um, all sorts of government housing, all sorts of supports. This Negro is actually more dependent than the slaves were. The slaves needed the slave master. The Negro, on when the slaves when they were enslaved, needed the slave master. But when the slaves were free, they used their skills and tools to build their own community. But this Negro, with all the tools in front of him, all the resources in front of him, all the opportunity in front of him, what does he do? He keeps going back to his slave master for more crumbs instead of saying, look, the recipe for cake is right in my hands. But the whole problem with this Negro is, even though he has the recipe for cake in his hands, he's too much of a coward to go out. And this is what I've seen, over the last 40 years, growing up here in the South Bronx and with people who have, and growing up among people who have dealt with these government programs. And I mean, I grew up on these government programs, and not through any fault of my own. And I have been trying to make every effort to wean myself off them since 1994, and I did. After I graduated college, I got off welfare, and it's been a rough road, and I haven't been able to keep jobs like I want, and I've been out of work for a while. But I still persevere and I still push because I know that I would rather be out on my own than dependent on a government program and all the strings and stipulations, and most importantly, the fear that these programs have, because that's what they instill in the mind of the Negro. That's why I call them dependent class, because this is what government programs teach you. You are taught to be afraid to go out and have your own. You're taught to go out to be afraid to go out and try to get your own job. You're taught to be afraid of some Section 8 boogeyman, of some welfare boogeyman. And you try to hold on to these programs with dear life. You try to keep the stuff that you get from these programs for dear life, instead of just saying, look, let me go out and get my own job. Let me go out and get my own stuff, and let me go out and stand on my own 2 feet. Because the whole point of these programs was originally, as they were originally intended, was to help someone until they got back up on their feet. But in the Negro community, what has happened is we've created this dependent class because the mother was given the programs, and then she, as a teacher of culture, went down every year to recertify with her children right behind her. And the children learned this as a model, and they learned to become dependent. They learned what, instead of me looking out for myself and learning how to be responsible for myself, what they learn is if I make a mistake, I can always go back to these government programs like your welfare, your Section 8, your food stamps, and I can always get a budget just like mom got. And this is something that many girls teach to their mothers teach to their daughters, and their daughters taught to their granddaughters and their great granddaughters. And this is why we have this vicious cycle of poverty that continues um, decade after almost generation after generation, and nothing has changed because no one has learned about having a work ethic. No one has learned about perseverance. No one has learned, how to get away from these programs, and no one has learned how that eventually you reach a point where you go from, assistance, which is just support, to get you to the point where you can literally support yourself. Now, I know this economy is not the greatest of all, but this is something that your Negro has not learned, and this is something that he can never continue to learn because the liberal doesn't want the Negro to learn interdependence because he depends on the Negro being at the bottom. As long as the Negro is at the bottom, he has a steady stream of money coming in from your congressmen and your Democratic politicians to your Section 8 landlords, to a whole plethora of people like your foreign stores. All these people rely on the Negro dollar, and as long as the Negro dollar remains dependent, they have a steady stream of $3.3 trillion flowing right to them. And a lot of people may think that I'm being mean and being cruel, but again, I grew up on these programs, so I know how dysfunctional they are, and I know how they try to sabotage people at every turn and every um, way that they try. Because when you try to go out and go venture on your own, here are these people trying to keep you from moving your life ahead. And the whole thing is that if you move your life ahead, they're out of a job, and they know that if enough black people wind up moving their lives ahead and walking away from this dependent class cycle, their economic system completely collapses. This liberal knows that once that happens, that's the end of him. And that's why he needs to keep this Negro dependent, and that's why he needs to keep you scared and worried about him taking away his Section 8 or his wealth. You don't need this. If you guys start your own businesses and support businesses like the one I run, this SJS Direct Imprint, we can have our own things like the slaves who were freed during the Reconstruction Act. They had their own towns, they had their own infrastructure, they had their own businesses, and they had their own politicians. And you can have that again. And this is what I want to see the Negro, turn this around because this is something we can do. But most of the black people, they're so cowardly and they're so codependent, and they want to be the victim, not understanding again the victim is not. Then they still believe that this victim is a position of power, and it's not a position of power. This victim position, and I know this from personal experience, is a position of weakness. And when you are a victim, you are pretty much being dictated to, and you have to follow somebody else's terms. And this is what has happened to the Negro. He is a victim, and he is now being dictated to by this white liberal, and his relationship literally mirrors that of a slave and a slave master. And the slave master gives you a couple of crumbs, gives you a little couple of meals and a place to stay, and you just do as you're told. And what the Negro does is he literally wastes his life away. And it's almost like that movie, The Matrix, where he was showing how these people are literally wasting their lives away and being used up. And this is what the Negro has been doing. He's just wasting his life away, and he could have the best life out here. And the whole thing is that God has the very best for black people, but the whole thing is that black people have to get up and roll up their sleeves. And, yeah, you're going to go through some pain, you're going to go through some hard times. I know this because I'm going through hard times right now. I mean, I lost a civil service job 7 years ago that was supposed to be, a place where I was supposed to stay for the rest of my life. And I'm still trying to get out here and persevere. I mean, I took every dollar of my savings and put it into publishing all these books back here. And I make every effort, to try to move my life forward. And I look at this black community, and it could be much better. I see a great vision for it. And I see greatness, but the whole thing is that it all again requires black people to start rolling up their sleeves and stepping up. And I call you Negro because, I want you to wake up. I want you to get up and, get your life together, because God gave you one life and you have to make it the very best it can possibly be. And if you guys feel that I'm degrading you, well, guess what? I'm not degrading. I'm telling you the truth. And the whole thing is that when I worked at the Strive program 15 years ago, we had to tell people these types of hard truths every day. When I worked at that program, volunteering to help them increase their resources to bring the homeless into the program, we had to tell those people, you're messing up, you're screwing up. Your behaviors are keeping you from getting a job. Your attitude is keeping you from getting a job. Your approaches to life are not allowing you to compete in this job market. And we had to keep telling them we had to deal with the worst of the worst. We had to deal with homeless, we had to deal with ex-offenders, we had to deal with people in recovery, and we had to deal with single mothers. We had to deal with the whole gambit of the most dysfunctional people in the African American community and the Latino community, and even some white folks. We had to deal with the worst of the worst, and we got those people functional and ready in 3 weeks. And most of those people, when I was working there, managed to keep jobs for more than 2 years, thanks to that job readiness program and thanks to that hard talk from people, coming at them and coming at them serious and letting them know, what, the way you're approaching life is just not working, and the way the Negro has been approaching life just doesn't work. It hasn't worked for 40 years, and the whole definition of insanity is doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result. And when you continue to do the exact same thing and expect a different result, you have to be crazy. Because, these government programs, this dependency, and, you guys going back and forth and, wasting your life, that's going nowhere. It's time to take a new approach. And I've said that in video after video, that it's time to do something different. It's time to try something different. It's time to come out of this box and stop following this dysfunctional life paradigm that screwed up your mother, screwed up your grandmother, and may have possibly screwed up your great-grandmother. This whole liberal narrative is not your narrative. And the whole thing is that God gave you life so that you could go out and create your own narrative. And that's the whole thing that the Negro is too scared to do. A lot of these people are so scared of white boogeymen like the Ku Klux Klan or white police officers. They're too afraid to go out and create their own narrative and define what black truly is. And this is something that, I want to see more black people go out and do and say, we're going to define what black is. We're not going to live by your silly narrative, Mr. White Liberal, or even Mr. White Conservative. We're not going to live by your standard. We're going to create our own standard. Just like your Hispanics have created their own standard, just like your gays have created their own standard, just like your Asians have created, and just like your Asians have created their own standard. We're going to create our own standard, and that's going to be what we say is black, and we're going to make it a functional standard that works for us and works to help our people. And this is something that I want to see more black people go out and do. And I have to come hard at people because this is just, I'm trying to show you the cold hard truth about things. This is why I do these vlogs and do these videos, because I want people, two things I want people to know is, one, I want them to get to know me so they can buy my books, and two, I want them to know what they need to know so that they can move their lives forward. Because every blog and video I try to do fits within my mission of creating positive stories about the African American experience, and trying to help black people improve the quality of their life. Because I look at the sad state of affairs in this black community, and we should be much, much further ahead by now. But instead, we are moving backwards. I look at things these days, and black people are killing black people just like they did back in the 1980s over Air Jordan sneakers, over somebody bumping into them, over somebody looking at them. This is what I dealt with as a kid back in the 1980s. You couldn't even look at people. I have social anxiety these days, even about making eye contact anywhere, because this is what I grew up with. Because if you looked at someone, it would lead to a fight. And these days, I see the same type of dysfunctional behaviors being repeated generation after generation. And no one is saying, what, we need to look at this vicious cycle and we need to make an effort to stop it. And stopping it, again, starts with us. And it starts with us looking at ourselves and saying, what, the way we're doing things just isn't working, and it's time for a different approach. You know, years of homicides is ridiculous. 40 years of economic dysfunction is ridiculous. And what I keep wondering when this Negro is going to say, like I say, enough is enough. When is he going to say, you know what, the way we're doing things is just not working. It's making everybody else rich at our own expense. I mean, when is it? When are we going to go and literally bear the pain and get ready for change? Because again, change doesn't is not a slogan for me. I've been making changes in my own life since I was 16 years old back in 1990, and I know how hard change is, and I keep waiting for this black community to wake up so we can go and start making the constructive changes that will help it move forward. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.